So we're out of time, unfortunately. Really well done for all the progress you've made this week. Keep it up, let me know how you got in practice, and I'll see you next week. One of the most common questions I get from students is, what should I practice or how should I practice? So today I'm going to go over how I use the Naomi planning techniques and SMART goals to really make sure I've got a practice plan that's personalised and individual towards your personal goals, and it's going to really get you the progress that you want. Now this actually works for any skill you want to improve, not just music. So if you're not a musician and you've stumbled across this video, you're still going to get stuff out of it, so feel free to stick around. So when you're using this Naomi planning technique, the first thing to work out are your needs. What is the need or the purpose of you doing the practice? Maybe it's you've got a gig coming up you want to learn the set for, or you've got a regular lesson with your teacher you need to get ready for, or perhaps it's a more general thing like just wanting to improve your playing generally. And whatever it is, that's obviously going to have a huge impact on how we practice and what we practice going forward, right? Now personally, I'm practicing to improve generally, right? Particularly improving my improvisation. So if that's the case for you as well, it's time to work out the general areas you want to improve. So for example, I'd like to improve my time feel, have more harmonic flexibility, so being able to do more substitutions and alterations on the harmony as I'm improvising. I'd like to know more standards. I'd like to get better at blues playing, and in particular using bluesy language on non-blues tunes. I'd like to know more jazz language in general and be a bit more flexible with a lot of it. And then when you are more familiar with this, you may end up with like an overwhelming number of these. And obviously all the ones I listed are way too many to work on in one individual practice session, right? And then once you've worked out your needs, the next thing to do is work out your aims. Now these should still be general and non-specific. So if you're working towards a gig, maybe it's a case of aiming to learn the set list in time. If you're working towards a lesson in a week or two's time, maybe it's a case of just having the material ready for the lesson. Or if like me, you're going for more general improvement, then what I like to do is link a few of those areas we previously identified together. So I mentioned wanting to improve my blues playing. Well, I can couple that with improving how many standards I know by learning a bunch of blues heads. That's also going to give me some more language, and if I do a blues transcription as well, that's going to give me more language. It's going to give me potentially more harmonic devices, helping out with that harmonic flexibility thing I mentioned earlier, and it's also going to help my time feel, because one of the big things for that is transcribing and moving that feel across to your own playing. But the key here is still trying to be general and non-specific, because that leads us straight in to the next step. Now, once you've got your aims, it's time to think about your objectives. And this is where we get into the really specific things we want to achieve by the end of our practice regime. Now, you can think of this like one practice at a time. So, by the end of this session, I want to achieve this. But I like to make things a little bit larger scale than that. So I like to think in terms of months, or in the case of this summer, I'm actually going to make it all the way from now, which is the middle of July, up to September. Just because I know that there's quite a few weeks in the end of this month and August when I'm either away or I've got a bunch of gigs, so there's going to be a bit less practice time then. Now, it can be quite easy to go a bit over the top with this and kind of become a bit unrealistic. So I know I want to learn these 20 blues heads and transcribe all of this 13 chorus Sonny Rollins solo and get all of that language down. It's obviously a great thing to aspire to, but to be honest, given the amount of time you've got, that might be quite unrealistic to get in my case, time frame for the summer. So to rein this in, I like to use SMART goals. Now I think this is something that actually started in business, but it's really useful for practice as well. And essentially all it means is that our goals are going to be specific, measurable, achievable, relevant to the actual objectives we've got, and most importantly, time-based. So there's a very definite deadline for achieving them. Now obviously with this, you've got to work out then how much time you can commit. I always like to underestimate it, because it's more likely that I'm going to have less time for something than more time. So for this practice routine, I'm going to try and fit everything into just 2 hours. So going back to the aims I mentioned previously, I wanted to work on blues language, blues heads, time feel, my harmonic flexibility. So let's make some objectives on these. For blues heads, by the end of summer, I've got around about 6 weeks. So I reckon getting 5 blues heads in that time. It's definitely specific, right? 5 is a very specific number. It's measurable, because I can easily know if I've got 5 more down. Achievable, because that's just under 1 a week, which gives me plenty of time to get it really into my fingers, into my ears, and maybe through a few different keys as well. It's definitely relevant, because it goes back to my aim of getting more standards and more blues heads down. And it's definitely time-based, because I know I've got until September the 1st to have this sorted. I'm actually going to make it more specific. Going back to the language thing I mentioned, a lot of the bebop and Charlie Parker blues heads have got quite cool language in there. So if I make sure that 3 of them are Parker blues heads, I'm going to be giving myself some more language I can get as well. So let's go to blues language now. I reckon I can get at least 4 bits of blues language which I can get from a transcription and get those across all keys and be able to apply them in a variety of harmonic contexts in this time, because that gives me more than 1 week per bit of language, and obviously it's something that I can work on multiple at a time during a practice session. So I want to apply them in blues tunes and also non-blues standards as well. So now on to time feel. Now this can be quite a tricky one, at least for me personally, to work on specifically in a SMART goal, just because it's something that I feel is always developing and always changing as you do more and more transcriptions. But I do know that if I work on a transcription, I'm definitely going to improve my time feel during that practice, especially if I apply it across the rest of my practice as well. Seeing as transcription is always a really useful thing to do, and it definitely should be something you do every single practice, I'm actually going to say that instead of working specifically on time feel, I'm going to work on a transcription and apply the time feel to other areas of my playing. I'm going to aim for 2 choruses, because that way there's so much I can dig out of that most of the time, and I can get loads of practice without trying to overreach and underperforming, which will make me feel a bit rubbish about these goals at the end if I don't meet them. And then the last thing I mentioned was harmonic flexibility. Now there's obviously so many different routes you could go with this. You could go down tritone subs, backdoor subs, playing outside, there's countless options. And I'm going to go for 2 things. So one thing I think is really cool about the blues is there's multiple different harmonic takes on it, right? There's the jazz blues, there's the traditional like 5/4-1 at the end, there's the bird blues, and so on and so on. One thing I think is really cool is that when you're jamming out blues, you can go through any combination of those chord changes, and it's going to sound great, and it all depends on what everyone's playing at the time. So I want to make sure that I've got the bird blues down, which is something I'm a little bit rusty on at the moment, and I want to make sure I can change between them during a solo. And sticking on this harmonic flexibility thing, another thing I'd like to do is improve my use of diminished language, the diminished sound over dominant chords, because at the moment it's something that I can do, but it doesn't always feel as natural as other harmonic things I'm able to do. So now that I've got my objectives, time to double check they are all definitely going to be SMART goals. So the 5 blues heads, that's definitely SMART. 4 pieces of blues language, that definitely ticks all the boxes as well. A 2 chorus transcription, great. And be able to apply that time feel in practice, be able to play bird blues in all keys, change between the harmonic types of blues comfortably within one solo. Those are both specific, relevant, achievable. And then being comfortable with the diminished sound, that's less specific because I'm not talking about specific language there, but I've already got some diminished language down, so I can use that to make sure I'm focusing specifically. It's measurable because I can know if I'm using that sound or not. It's achievable, it's relevant because of the harmonic flexibility, and then again, it's time-based because I've got that deadline. So now it's time to work out our method or how we're going to practice. This is obviously going to be slightly different for everyone, right? Everyone works in different ways, different things work better for different people, and you've just got to work out what works best for you, and we'll talk a bit more about that later on. Now personally, I like to have a clear but kind of loose structure. So what I mean by that is I like to break my practice down into a few different sections. Obviously starting off with a warm-up, then I always have a section on repertoire, a section on language, a section on anything harmonic I'm working on, anything rhythmic I'm working on, and also making sure I'm getting some transcription as well. But what I do within these 6 sections can change quite a lot depending on the objective. Now, as I said earlier, I want to keep this practice routine down to fitting into 2 hours, which means for these 6 sections, I've only got time for 20 minutes each. Now, if I get more time, I can obviously go a bit longer than that and dig a bit deeper, but having this 20 minutes means I can really specifically work out what can I get done in 20 minutes. Now we'll go over warm-up techniques in a separate video, but for rep, I know that I want to get bird blues down in a whole load of different keys, and I also know I want to get those 5 blues heads. So for 5 blues heads, I can get one of those down a week, and then start to focus on the changes in the bird blues. And for language, is getting those 4 bits of blues language down. Now I know for language, it's really important for me personally to make sure I can sing it before I can play it. So I'm going to make sure that I work on singing the language. Then after I can do that, make sure I can play it in all keys, and then apply it in a variety of contexts. Now I might not be able to fit in all 3 of those every single time I practice, and obviously I want to make sure I can sing it before I even think about applying it. So in the first week or 2, it might just be singing those 4, or maybe just singing one of them, maybe that'll take me a full 20 minutes. But by having these stages written down, when I'm ready to move on to the next stage, I know what I need to do. And then we're on to harmony. And the two different harmonic things I identified in my objectives were firstly making sure I can switch between the different types of blues progressions mid-solo, and secondly making sure I've got that diminished stuff more comfortable. Now obviously there's no way I'll be able to switch between the different blues progressions before I've got the bird blues changes comfortable, but once I am at that level, that's something I can go in this stage, so I can practice thinking, okay, do it a really structured way, maybe one chorus of each progression first, and then I can start to do it a bit more naturally. And for the diminished stuff, again, for me it's really important to be able to sing that sound over the chords, so make sure I can sing the diminished patterns that I know, and then apply them as well. Now this is a tiny bit different from the language side of things, because here I'm talking more about hitting chord tones or extensions, and using language as a way to that rather than just focusing on just the language itself. Now when it comes to rhythm, the only rhythmic thing I kind of identified in my objectives was the time feel. And obviously I do want to make sure that as soon as possible that is applied across the board to all of this practice stuff, because then it's going to become a lot more natural, a lot easier, and I'm not going to have to think about it on the bandstand. But keeping this section in means that I've got a place I can think solely about that and just play things that are super easy for me, like, I don't know, scales or heads that I'm really comfortable with or something like that. But in terms of how I make sure I'm really applying that time feel to this, I'm going to make sure I've got one phrase that I think's got a great time feel from a transcription, and I can play that along to the record really well, matching the time feel. Then I'm going to take that same phrase and try and play it with the exact same time feel along to just a drum track. Then once I've got that, I'm going to try improvising, keeping that time feel the whole way through. Then the last section is obviously transcription, and the method here, nice and simple. Make sure I've found the solo I want to transcribe, take it a little bit at a time, do all the normal things I do, which I'll cover more in depth in a later video, but singing along to it, finding that on the horn, kind of similar stuff to I mentioned in my how to get that sound video. So the last thing I'm going to do is work out the order that I go through these sections in. So time feel is something I want to be working on all the way through my practice if I can, and that all comes from transcription. So obviously I want to start with the transcription so I can have that time feel ready, then go into the rhythm section so I can really nail that time feel and try taking it into other contexts. Then it doesn't matter too much which order I do it then. I think I'll put rep first, because then I don't need to take a break for any singing stuff. It also means when I come to the language and harmony sections, I have a better chance of being able to apply it on the rep that I'm currently working on. And now I've got my full practice plan written out that I can follow throughout the summer to really make sure I'm always working towards my goals. But there are still 2 more steps to this Naomi planning process. The next step's kind of the obvious one, implementation. Now that we've got the practice plan, it's just a case of sticking with it up until that deadline you've given yourself for your objectives. So for me, obviously sticking with this now until September the 1st, really making sure I'm digging deep, even practicing even on days when I might not want to, and sticking with that plan the whole time. If you aren't aware, it's currently 38 degrees in London today. There's nowhere at all I can get through 2 hours of sweaty practice without something to cool me down. I always go back and forth on how much of my practice I should show in these videos. Obviously for a lot of what I'm talking about it's quite relevant, but I appreciate it's not always the most interesting or exciting thing to hear. But if you'll be interested in me starting a daily series, it'd probably be like a YouTube Shorts thing rather than these full-length videos, but of my practice, leave a comment down below. Hiding in the hallway because it's the only part of the flat which isn't absolutely roasting right now. But anyway, the final step in this Naomi technique is the evaluation. So when you've got to your deadline, look back at your objectives and think, have I achieved them? If yes, excellent. If not, rather than beating yourself out, try and work out why have you not. Was it a case of you thought you'd be able to do 45 minutes practice every day, but it turned out you could only do that 3 times a week, and there were other days you could only fit in like 5-10 minutes? Or if you were practicing as much as you thought, maybe it's a case of you underestimated how long things took to do, or, as is quite commonly the case, you're using practice techniques that don't quite match on with you as a person. So when I first started getting into jazz properly, trying to learn a lot of language, I was trying to just play it, and it was never going into my head until I realised how, for me personally, the singing step is, to be honest, more important than actually playing it on the instrument. And since I got that, everything is so much quicker for me to learn. And if I'd never evaluated it, I've never found that out.